Hey, Dr. Todd.
Hi.
Just to let you know, I've got my video on, but I'm going to mute myself because I'm at a soccer game again.
That is not, not a problem. What I want to start with is, do you have questions for me? First of all, do you have any questions? Okay. Let me make just a few comments about task 1 of the SCIP. I've been reading your task 1s, and I think I'm pretty close to having most of those finished. One of the things I have noticed, task 1, the needs assessment, is for gaps in communication, and it does ask for setting, but I don't think you have to give all of that information about academics and all that stuff that you have done in some of your other pieces. It just makes your paper longer, and it also makes that much more that has already been read, so your Turnitin score will go up. So make sure you look at the rubric and make sure you're addressing what the rubric says. Then the organizational analysis, that is all related to your school climate. So when you're either introducing it or doing your summary, make sure you talk about the climate you feel your school has, and then you use the data that you get to prove that. So is your school a good place to be? Do the kids like to come there? Are the parents happy when they're there? Do the teachers like to come to work, or is it a place that they just really dread going every day? So, you know, what kind of a climate that do you have in general? And then you start talking about the information that you have about your school leadership. So those were the 2 things that I noticed the most often that seemed to be not exactly there, or it wasn't addressed exactly. So I wanted to go ahead and talk about that. And then we'll now talk about the marketing plan, and that's what you're to be working on this week, or the task 3. So with your SCIP team, whoever you've chosen along the way, you're to develop a marketing plan that's based on needs assessment results. And
Dr. Todd, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
I knew you couldn't hear me without my thing. So when you talk about climate, kids have different perspectives, and I just think that kids can be downers sometimes. So is that relevant information? Like if I hear kids saying, man, I hate this school, I mean, I think all teenagers say that. So
no, you
is
don't
that what I'm looking for?
Something out of just where, you know, you get a sense of whether you think people enjoy being there or not. Is your absentee rate huge? Is your tardy rate huge? Those are indications that they don't like being there. But if they're there most of the time and they're doing their work and stuff, that's an indication that generally they're happy about being there, and your climate's probably pretty good. Are your teachers laying out? Or are the teachers actually being present? Are they taking part? Are they working together? You know, those are indications whether it's a good place to live, and you're not relying directly on somebody's opinion. But that gives you an idea.
One follow-up question with that. So with the change in leadership, and with an increase in accountability, does that increase in accountability make for a negative atmosphere? Or, you know, I'm just trying to make sure, can I necessarily align this is a negative place to be versus this is higher accountability and people just don't like that? You know what I mean?
You're correct. A lot of the times the negativity will be because of the fact more is expected of them. And so that's one of the reasons you've got to be really cautious about how you interpret some of the information. If something has changed in the way that the school is run, you've got new leadership and they're expecting more. Initially, there is going to be a little bit of disconnect, and there's going to be, this is horrible, I'm having to do all this. But once they get used to it, things calm down, and they see that the school is running better, they're usually really happy with those changes, and they feel that everybody's being treated equally, whereas in the past probably they felt that some were getting by with things than others. But I just want you not to just jump in on school leadership. I want you to think about how that school leadership affects the overall climate, and what indicators do you have, either for the positive or the negative. And you can look at things as much as attendance rates, tardies, whether teachers are even present or whether they're taking time off just because they can. You know, there's a lot of things you can look at that gives you an idea of whether or not the climate is a good one for students and teachers. Does that help?
Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay.
Dr. Todd, that is going to fall underneath the task 1 under the leadership analysis portion, or under the organizational analysis?
All right, the way that it reads in the description, it talks about, let me look back at that one. It talks about the organizational analysis, and it's all to do with climate of the school. The whole organizational analysis deals with the climate. The school leadership is one portion of the climate, okay? So it's all together, it's all in that section. So that's why I said, you know, address the climate part either in the introduction to when you're talking about school leadership or in the summary. Just make sure that you use that terminology about the school climate so that they know you haven't left it out. Okay? All right, any other questions before we move on? All right, let's look at the marketing plan. And this is task 3. You've done your needs assessment. You've done your analysis. You've also looked at the gaps in your communication. You've looked at the climate. In task 2, you've identified your resources, and you've put a price tag on that. And there's several different ways you can do that resource identification. And Dr. Tillman has given you some ideas, I'm sure, if you've met with her, as well as some of the things that I have said. So we're down to the marketing plan. And I think last week I said, you know, I'm not sure that I wouldn't have put the marketing plan before the resource identification, because you're actually having to come up with a plan after you've identified your resources. So it's sort of, which do you need first? And it doesn't really matter because they both have to match. So you're using that same team that you have been working with on this community and school information, and you're developing a marketing plan that's based on the needs assessment results, the organizational analysis results, and your resource identification. In other words, you've identified all these resources, so now you're going to put them to use in this plan. And this plan has to have a statement of purpose. It has to have the strengths of the current school program and how it can enhance the image of the school within the community. Now, remember, we're talking about communication here. So this would be strengths of the current school program and the communication that's getting out to the community as well as within your school. What's the opportunities for input from the community related to any decision-making process? And what's the opportunities for involvement by the community in school activities, such as the concerts, the theater events, athletic contests, academic challenges, and so forth? And then it has to have a timeline for when you're going to implement it. And then it has to have feedback, a feedback component for evaluation and reflection. The plan should include an implementation plan that uses a variety of media, from the traditional printed form to the more elaborate electronic form. Now remember, in one of those first tasks that you were supposed to do, you were supposed to be looking at communication, and then you were supposed to be looking for your short-term goals, how can you increase your communication? And for your long-term goal, what activity are you going to have that's going to bring the community in? And so this is the marketing plan that's going to help you get all those pieces out there in the community. So that's what this one is supposed to be doing. And then to be proficient, your marketing plan has to be consistent and logical in supporting the findings that you established in any of the following areas: the needs assessment results, the organizational analysis results, the resource identification, and the plan itself has to have the following details: the statement of purpose, the description of your current program, the opportunities for input, the opportunities for involvement, a timeline for implementation, and then a feedback component for your evaluation and reflection. And the only thing to get accomplished that they say is you include all of the above, and the marketing plan evidences creative and collaborative leadership, and you have an expert use of technology that delegates responsibilities and empowers the stakeholders. So, as I've told you all along, 3 is good, 4 is wonderful, but 3 will get you as far as the 4 will. So, you know, this should not be anything that any school system ever uses to try to figure out anything about your ability to do something. This is strictly to be used to help you get your licensure. That's what the things that go in task stream are supposed to be for. So sometimes it's going to be really hard to do some of the things depending on whether you're a classroom teacher or you have a job. So be happy with 3 or anything above. If you get a 4, feel thrilled. So I just want to make sure that you understand that. Now, do you have any other questions about this task or any others that go with the first 2? Okay. All right. Do you have any other questions about anything?
Well, Dr. Todd, and I apologize for the background noise. So does this mean, like, as part of my long-term goal was the idea of we are legitimately planning and prepping, and I'm in the midst of doing like a literacy night, this marketing plan would be actually putting that into real effect, correct?
Yes. And how you're going to do that. You know, what are you going to do for your short-term goals to get information out, and then how are you going to pull off that literacy event? Okay. Any other questions? Carrie?
Yeah, Dr. Todd, I was wondering about what you said there at the end to have the accomplished. When it was saying creative, are we talking about, like, for instance, my school, we're doing a spring fling where we are incorporating a bunch of events all at the same time on one night. So there's going to be we're going to feed people for free. There's going to be a book fair. We're going to have a curriculum piece where teachers do activities with their parents and students. Several things are happening. So would it be pictures of that event added into the paper?
I don't know the answer to that. And you know, we're not given a whole lot of information except what it says. The marketing plan evidences creative and collaborative leadership. I think, you know, some of the pictures would be a way of proving you did it. But I would look at it, and this is something to talk with Dr. Tillman about. She may have different opinions about it. But I would think that the creative and the collaborative leadership would be in the planning itself. You know, you're using what your idea is to have several things going on. That would be the creative event, because you're trying to get them there and you've got several different things for several different ages present. And then the collaborative piece would be where you have all of those people working together, and that's in your plan. So the pictures would be your evidences that would go in your competency folio, but in your planning, that's where you would have that creative piece. Okay, does that help? All right, any other questions?
Yes, I just wanted to ask if say, for example, because we're doing the same thing, planning a parent academy, and is that one event the basis for the whole paper, like, you know, relating it back to the fiscal resources and all of that stuff?
Your marketing plan is the plan for all of the things that you're doing short-term and long-term.
Okay.
Go back to your task 1 and then the information task 2 and task 3. How you do your marketing plan, you're going to have to pull from your fiscal resources and your human resources. So that would be resource identification piece. What you're going to do goes back to task 1. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Those are good questions. All right. The other thing I wanted to do, and we actually may get out quicker tonight than we have some nights, because I didn't want to go into a whole lot of something else when you've got as many things as you're working on right now. But I do want to talk with you a little bit about some of the employment law that you're reading about. And that's the reason that I put some of the things in a handout for you to look at. Chapter 3 talks about equal employment. And if you really think about what does that mean, Chapter 3 tells you where a lot of the information came from and the laws that go under the equal employment that we're all having to follow. So it started out with Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of '64. And what that said is it prohibits discrimination in employment by employers, employment agencies, and memberships in unions on the basis of race, color, religion, gender, or national origin. Now, that law was amended in '72, and that included state and local governments, government agencies, and political subdivisions, including school districts. Now, think about that. You know, in my lifetime, that's not that many years ago. In your lifetime, it probably is. But, you know, think about that people didn't have these protections until '64, and school districts didn't have them until '72. So you need to think about the history and where this has come from and the things that's happened in history that's affected all of this. Then another thing that falls under the equal employment is the Equal Pay Act of '63. And this was an amendment to the Fair Labor Standards Act, which was actually written in 1938. So think about that. The first Fair Labor Standards was written in '38. And the purpose of that was to govern various labor practices, which included minimum wage and overtime pay. It prohibited wage discrimination on the basis of gender among employees who perform equal work in jobs, and that goes back to the equal pay, equal work in jobs that required equal skill, effort, and responsibility, and that are performed under similar working conditions. And then you had the Age Discrimination Act. This was passed in '67, was amended in '74, '78, and '86. And what this does, it prohibits employment discrimination against individuals. And it started out being aged 40 to 65, and then it was changed in '78 to age 70. So that tells you a little bit about the age discrimination and when that came into play. Then you had the Rehabilitation Act of '73. Now, remember, I'm going over these because all of these affect things that when you're hiring people, you have to look at. And this was designed to aid people that had disabilities, secure rehabilitation training, and access to federally funded programs, public buildings, and employment. And the thing that would be most knowledgeable for you all would be the Section 504 comes out of this. The American with the Disabilities Act, that was passed in '60. It was intensified with the Rehabilitation Act in '73. And what it does, it protects against discrimination in hiring, promotion, discharge, compensation, and training. And it assures access to public buildings, public transportation, and other public services. Then you had the Veterans Reemployment Rights, which was actually 1940, but it was updated again in '64. And the title of that act was the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. Then you had the Immigration Reform and Control Act of '86. And this required the employers to verify the eligibility of every person to work in the United States. And that is still in place today. And there have been various times when some of the large companies were fined because they had people working that you could not verify the employment. Most of the time, that's not going to happen with teachers because they have to be licensed and they have to provide that licensure. But you just need to know that this is all there. And then you have Title IX of the Education Amendments of 72. And that information is in your textbook on pages 63 and 64. And I'm just going to quickly refer to that in your book. And what I want you to look at is it provides that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity that's receiving federal financial assistance. Now, it gives you several court cases that came about that you probably will want to look at as you're reading this section. One of the most interesting things that happened to us is we had a young lady who decided she wanted to go out for football. And she was a good kicker. So we did not make a big deal about it. We allowed her to go out for football. But then what we had to do was get a place where she would have access for a locker room. And we didn't have that because when our school buildings were built, they were built in the 60s. And did you ever hear of a girl playing football in the 60s? No, you didn't. They were doing other things. So our field house didn't have appropriate girls changing area. So we had another building. It certainly wasn't as nice as what the field house was, but it was another building that we could convert and put a shower and give her a place to change clothes and all. So when you're dealing with older buildings that some of you have talked about in some of your papers, you run into all kinds of things. And then when you run into these laws and you have students that want to do things that are not exactly what everybody in the community thinks about, then you have to start really looking at things and thinking, okay, if I do this, I'm breaking the law. If I do this, I will be able to help and solve the situation, but it's going to cost some money, and it will cost some money. So, those are some things that as you get into unusual situations, I would encourage you to deal with your central office, and especially encourage them, if they don't do it, to deal with their lawyer, because the lawyer will go in and look at the most current laws, and they will interpret and they will help guide you through that. That's one of the things that you don't want to make mistakes on. You don't want to make mistakes when you're dealing with something that you pretty much are sure you're going to lose if they take it to court. So most of you don't have the kind of money in your school systems to fight these laws and to fight them in court. And you're probably going to lose if you haven't done due diligence to try to help deal with the situation. So I wanted you to look at that. And then another part that I think you're going to find really important starts on 69 and runs through 76. And that is the part talking about negligent hiring, defamation, and referencing. And so when you think about negligent hiring, what comes to your mind? What are you thinking about when you hear somebody talk about negligent hiring?
You haven't done your due diligence to make sure that all the proper, their licensing, schooling, you haven't gotten all of their transcripts and things to prove that they are truly qualified to be employed.
You probably haven't done a criminal records check either. So there's so many things in this day and age, and it continues to really bother me that I see it's almost every year, once or twice in the year, that some employee is going to be accused of doing something inappropriate with a student. And, that distresses me because we should not get ourselves in that situation, and we should be above that. And I don't mean that to sound elitist by any stretch of the imagination, but we know the laws, and we should be living by the laws, and our job is to protect the children, not to get them in a difficult situation. It's going to make their life more difficult down the road. So all of the things that she mentioned would go into that. And some of it can also be looking at the retention. When do you let a teacher go? You know, if a teacher is not really performing, the students aren't learning, do you keep them because you can't find somebody better? Or is there a possibility you can work with these teachers and get them better? Or is it time to just hang it up during those first few years before they get into where you're getting recurring, like 4-year contracts and those kinds of things? So there's a lot to look at there, and there's a lot of things to think about. And it goes into your background checks, your fingerprinting, failure to warn, non-disclosure provisions, and then it gives you some examples. And then it gives you on page 74 suggested risk management guidelines. It says, know your district's policies on criminal background checks. And then review the employment history of all the applicants and require verifiable explanations of any inconsistencies or gaps that you find in employment. Inform the candidates there will be a follow-up check on their work history and educational background, and make sure the references are checked. Now, one of the things that is really also one of the things you have to remember, a lot of times when you're doing the reference checks, if you get someone who says, yes, they worked here from such to such, and that's all they will say, that should set off an alarm in your head. Like, okay, what's going on here? Because most of the time, if a teacher's really good, then they're going to say, oh, I mean, she had really good classroom control. Maybe they shouldn't, but they're going to. But if all they will say is, yes, this person worked here this particular length of time, then that should just be a red flag. It may not necessarily, because it may be that some of those school systems, the lawyers have said, I don't care what you say, you're going to get yourself in a mess if you give any more information than what's required. And all that's required is that you verify they worked here. So you can't always let that be a signal to you, but occasionally just think, okay, there's something going on here. And then when you talk to somebody else, you very well may find what those things are.
Dr. Todd.
Yes.
I have a question real quick about that. So as I was reading this, something came to my mind about a principal that got a reference call from somebody that used to work at our school. And, you know, the girl, she didn't get the job. And I know what the principal said, and this was not who I'm working with now, it's before. But, you know, they said, you know, she's a really good worker. You know, she has good scores. You know, her EBOS is blue, but she starts a lot of drama, and she keeps things going at the school. So that's illegal.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Now, everything that was said up to that point until the last part was fine.
Because facts, like you base it on facts. You don't base it on your personal opinion. Okay. I just wanted to ask you about that. So thank you.
You know, if they'd have pushed it and they found out about it, most of the time they don't find out about it, but occasionally they will push to find out why they didn't get hired.
Yeah.
That's when you could get in trouble. But you had two equally good candidates, and you were given that information about yes, but one's a drama queen, and you went with the other one. You know, it'd be hard to prove that, but yes, that would put you in a situation that you don't want to be in.
Okay, thank you.
So that's often the reason that you'll get the yes, and you know, it depends on how well the lawyers have trained the principals. Okay, good question. All right. I also was interested, and I meant to say this earlier, one of the discussion boards that one of you all wrote mentioned that your policy allows you to interview by telephone or by something like what we're using tonight, or in person. And I will tell you that years ago, I had interviewed, and we interviewed a person because they couldn't come in at the time we needed. They were working as a principal in another state. I would urge you to be very cautious about that, because when our board heard it, they didn't like it at all. And then as it turned out, while this person got glowing recommendations from the school system where they were, we had trouble with him within six to 8 months of school starting. And so, you know, he was getting ready to retire from that state. But whether the rules are different, which I suspect are, or he had just got so used to doing what he wanted, it didn't matter what the rules were in another state. But, you know, I'm a firm believer that if you create the mess, you fix it before you leave. And so we had enough by the middle of the year. Well, I guess it was a little bit after the middle of the year, that my assistant superintendent and I went in and met with every teacher to find out what was going on. And we had sent him home to give us time to do this, and to give us time to interview and find out what was going on. And then we had our attorney meet with us, and we suspended him until we could finish or try to arrive at a better solution. So, you know, on paper he was perfect. On the telephone with the person, but see, I had met him, and so had several of the people who were on the committee. We just did not do the actual interview that particular day when we did some others. And so the board found out about it. And so when we started having trouble with it, they were not happy with us. We survived it. We got rid of him, encouraged him to go to a different job in a different place. And, you know, it worked out okay. Now, it doesn't always work out like that. Sometimes you get a bad hire and you can't get rid of them. That, as you know, he had done enough stuff that we had the documentation for it, that it did not take very long for us to go in the school and get the school money records and see that he had misused some funds in different places. And then we interviewed all the teachers to find out what was going on, because we had a strong inkling that something wasn't working out really well. And so we took extensive notes on it. But, you know, I would just encourage you, even though your policy may allow you to do that, learn from my mistake. You know, even though they appear to be the very best one, they may not be. It may be a person that does not necessarily interview the best that would be the better situation. And that you never know. You make mistakes and you just deal with them the best you can.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yes, ma'am.
Todd, in reference to hiring? And in our county, because we need teachers, we resort to lateral entry teachers. And the problem that I'm seeing is the lack of experience in the classroom going through that student teaching process, to where now they get thrown in the classroom with not as much support, and we end up losing someone a year later after spending so much time invested in them. And we, you know, it's just, I'm not sure how to make it better. But I think that student teaching is a crucial piece in as a teacher.
Oh, I agree with you. And we have been back, even when I was a superintendent and when I was a principal, we were dealing with the same issue. And it's just getting worse, in my opinion, because there's not as many people going into it, because at least in North Carolina, the legislature has not made teaching a priority and a positive experience, or at least that's my feeling about it. Because they've taken this away from you and that away from you, and they don't give you much for materials and supplies, and so it just continues. But I do understand they're talking about doing some of the things that they took away and putting them back, which is a really good thing. And that would be wonderful if they would do that. So politics plays so much of a part in how we are treated, regardless of what state you're in. And so you just have to realize that and do the best that you can. one of the things Sharon said, one of the best teachers we ever had was a lateral entry teacher. Now, I don't know how he did when he first came, but he was a parent who volunteered when he was off, and he realized he loved going to school, and he had so much fun there. And so he went back to school. He went back to school and got enough credits that he could enter lateral entry, I think. That's the way it worked. And he was a middle grades teacher. They loved him, and he loved them. And in the cafeterias, he would sing Elvis songs to them, when the middle schoolers were there. So you can get some real treasures with those lateral entry, especially if they've had experience in a school as a parent. And not all of them are going to have that experience. And I've also had teachers who had training and had the student teaching experience as well as internship experiences, and they were overwhelmed that first semester. And they wound up having the teachers who were there were so supportive, and they would take this young teacher's, they would take her lunch kids, and they would say, you go finish planning, because they realized if they didn't step in as a team of teachers, they were going to lose that person. And they knew she was going to be a good teacher. They just knew she was overwhelmed by the things she could not control. And so, the more support, Sharon, that you're right, the more support that you can give them, the better off you're going to be. And that's both the brand new teacher right out of college or the lateral entry. But you're right. Some of them, this is a funny story. One of the teachers that we hired, that when we walked in the building, we thought that nothing was going on because she had no classroom control. And that's one of the points I was going to make. A lot of the lateral entry have a real hard time with classroom control. And they had been working with her all year long. And they decided at the end of the year that they just had it. She just could not improve. Things were not getting any better. Then when her test scores came back, I'll be blessed if she didn't have really good test scores. So either those kids were really, really smart, or she knew how to relate to them in the chaos. And I don't know which it was. But at that point, it had already gone too far, and because we'd already had to turn it in. And I don't know whether they would have changed their mind or not, because that was the principal's decision and her team's decision. But, sometimes they'll have good test scores and they don't appear to be good teachers. And then there was another teacher, and she was a middle school teacher too. This is also another story. There was another middle school teacher that I could walk in the building and I heard her yelling down the hall. Well, I'm of the opinion that teachers don't need to yell. And I'm thinking, what is going on with this woman? How come she is so loud? Well, the kids loved her. And she did a good job in her classroom. The kids learned. They did well in class. So, I just decided it's not worth my worrying about whether or not she's yelling at all. So a lot of it is that chemistry between the teacher and the kids, whether or not they are successful or not. Would I have been successful yelling at them down the hall? No, I would not have been. But she was just sarcastic enough that seemed to work for that age group. Now, would she have been successful in other age groups? Maybe, maybe not. Possibly she would not, but she was very good for there. So the other things I want you to look at, and I just outlined them briefly, teacher rights. I want you to look at the information about licensure, probationary contracts, and you'll know more about that from your own system. And then the continuing contract, supplementary contract duty, that would be for coaching and those kinds of things. You'll have a separate contract most of the time. And then what are the employment requirements? And then I wanted to make sure that you paid attention to the teacher rights. Hearings, procedural due process, evidence and bias, Reduction in force comes into place whenever there has been some reason that your system has lost a lot of teachers, or maybe a lot of students moved and you've lost teachers. And then that's when the system's reduction in force policy goes into effect. And often it has nothing to do with the ability of the teachers, but it has to do with whatever is written in that policy, and many times it will be who is taught the longest. Property interest, what about vagueness, and then student, teachers, interns, and substitute teachers. Now, under the teacher behaviors, there is a term that I've never really heard used. It's the concept of nexus. And it was commonly defined as teacher employment issues as a connection or link between their conduct and their fitness to teach. So I think you want to look at that and see what they say about that. And then you got the privacy, your freedom of speech, your incompetence, insubordination, immoral conduct, teacher abuse of students, drug testing of school employees, and then teacher use of social media. So you've got all of those things under teacher behaviors. And then there is a table in the other book on page 132, which is this book, the resource management for school administrators. The table on 132 is sort of a quick review of the various laws that deal with equal employment opportunity. So some of the ones I already went over that we've already talked about, they're there, and it gives a brief description on the side. But I really want you to look at that most of the laws that deal with equal employment opportunity and equal employment was passed from the 60s and the 70s, and the latest changes have been in the 80s. So, you know, was it so bad before that was one of the main pieces that people were looking at, and they were getting legislation passed because people had been mistreated for so long? Or, you know, exactly what was going on? So, you know, think about that, and think about that in connection to the history that was going on during those years too. All right, do you have any other questions? Because like I said, this is going to be a shorter one than we've sometimes had. Yes, Kelly.
I have a question about task 4.
Okay.
Because it's a little bit different. Hold on. So this one says, like, for task 4, we're doing the SCIP and then the CAAP. Is that right?
Yes, and you've not done the CAAP yet.
Right. So do we only do half now and then half then, or
we're going to do, see what they've done is they've turned some of these around to make them to fit into semesters.
Okay.
So I think we're going to be doing the CAP 1 in this semester. So, and then we'll look ahead to the rest of the CAP. So I would not worry about doing all of this until you get really close to the end and we've done some of the CAP, and just remind me that we need to look at, or at least let's look at the CAP, and then you can go ahead and do the SCIP. So what I'll do next week is I'll go over task 4, but I'll also try to remember and go over task 1 of the CAP, which is the next thing that we're going to be doing. We're still going to get that one done before the summer.
Okay.
If at all possible, Dr. Lamb would like for us to get as much of the CAP done, because you're going to have things finished by around, is it the end of June, maybe 6 to 8 weeks, or the middle of July? Because it is a very quick session. It's a 10-week session. So anything we can get done ahead of time, the better off you're going to be. So that way, when you do this, we'll at least have looked at it, and then you can do your reflections and look ahead and go back to that, and then we can still get the SCIP turned in. So I will remember to do SCIP 4, and we'll go ahead and look at the CAP 1. Now, next week is also when your group will do your presentation on the, I'll do just a minute. I was going to share on the
Case study 4.
case study 4. Yeah, I'm trying to get there. Case study 4, which is over here on the side. Now, this one is an interesting one, and, well, I can't get my page to move. That's not what I wanted. Let's see if I can get it to move on this side. Yeah, there we go. It's case study 4. And when I was reading case study 4, it says inclusive education, success for all or success for some. And so it goes into what has occurred. But there was somewhere that it says inclusion versus mainstreaming. Well, mainstreaming is putting in place the least restrictive environment. Sometimes inclusion can be mainstreaming, but not necessarily. So I wasn't exactly sure what that was looking at. But anyway, that's the one, if we can find it. And I'm not sure that I have it, because when Dr. Lamb copied these for all of us, the mainstreaming versus inclusion there was not a material section. So I will have to look and see if I can find that for you, and I'll do that tonight. So if I do, I'll send you an email. All right, any other questions tonight?
No.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop the sharing, and then I'm going to end the meeting. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week, and I hope we remain with some sun. Have a good day.